When you look at a map today, it's easy to think Britain's borders stop at the British Isles. Yet scattered around the globe are 14 overseas territories still under British administration, from Gibraltar at the Gateway to the Mediterranean to the remote Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic. These remnants hint at what Britain once was, the heart of an empire so vast that people said the sun never set on its lands. At its peak just over a century ago, the British Empire controlled a quarter of the world's landmass and nearly a third of its population. How did a small island nation off the coast of Europe rise to become the most powerful empire the world has ever seen? And why did it eventually fade? This is the story of the British Empire, its rise, its golden age, and its slow, complex decline. England, before empire, a kingdom seeking reach. The roots of the British Empire predate the modern United Kingdom. For centuries, England was the dominant force in the British Isles. It absorbed Wales, conquered parts of Ireland, and spent centuries at odds with Scotland, which fiercely resisted English domination. By the 16th century, England had become a strong maritime power with a growing economy. Queen Elizabeth I encouraged overseas ventures, granting explorers and merchants royal charters to claim new lands and expand trade. Early efforts were inconsistent. Explorers like Sir Francis Drake circled the globe and raided Spanish holdings, but permanent colonies were hard to maintain. The first English attempt at settlement in North America, Roanoke Island, 1585, vanished mysteriously. Still, Elizabeth laid the groundwork for future empire by granting trading monopolies to companies such as the Levant Company, 1592, and the famous East India Company, 1600. These corporations were the prototypes of British overseas expansion, profit-driven, semi-private, but backed by the Crown, Scotland's ambitions, and the road to union. In 1603, England and Scotland were joined under a single monarch when James VI of Scotland became James I of England through the union of the crowns. The kingdoms stayed politically separate, but this dynastic link mattered. Both realms eyed overseas riches. Scotland tried to build its own empire, but largely failed. The most disastrous effort was the Darien Scheme, 1698, where Scots attempted to create a trading colony in Panama. Disease, Spanish hostility, and poor planning doomed the project, wiping out nearly a fifth of Scotland's invested wealth. This financial disaster convinced many Scots that their best chance for prosperity was to join England's growing empire. By the early 1700s, after political upheaval such as the Glorious Revolution, 1688, both nations formally united under the Acts of Union, 1707, creating the Kingdom of Great Britain. The combined state would soon dominate world trade and colonization. Colonies take shape: crown, charter, and commerce. British colonies took several forms. Crown colonies were ruled directly by the monarch through governors. Charter colonies operated under corporate charters, granting settlers some self-rule. Proprietary colonies were privately controlled by individuals or companies. This flexible system fueled growth. In Ireland, the plantation of Ulster under King James I created a model of organized settlement, moving loyal Protestants into strategic areas, later applied in North America. Through the 1600s, England expanded in the Caribbean, Barbados, Jamaica, and seized New York from the Dutch in 1665. Trade networks expanded in Africa and Asia, often fortified with military posts. In 1660, the Royal African Company was chartered, becoming a major player in the transatlantic slave trade, a brutal but immensely profitable system that enriched Britain for centuries. Wars with rivals and the road to naval supremacy. Britain's empire grew through commerce but also war. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, secured valuable territories such as Gibraltar, Minorca, and parts of Canada. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, often called the First World War, gave Britain decisive victories over France. Britain seized Quebec, ending French power in Canada, and gained Florida from Spain. Caribbean islands like Grenada and Tobago joined the empire. The Royal Navy was the backbone of this growth. By blockading rivals and protecting trade routes, Britain became the unrivaled maritime power of the 18th century. Meanwhile, the East India Company was transforming from a trading firm into a territorial power. Its victory at the Battle of Plassey, 1757, put Bengal under British control and opened the door to dominance across India. The American Revolution, a shock to the system. Despite wealth and power, Britain struggled to manage its colonies. The 13 American colonies resented taxation without representation, especially as Britain sought to raise revenue after costly wars. By 1775, tensions erupted into the American Revolution. In 1776, colonial leaders declared independence as the United States of America. After 8 years of war, Britain recognized their independence in 1783. Losing America was a severe blow but not fatal. Britain pivoted east and south, toward Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, regions less settled by European rivals and rich in resources. A new focus, Asia and the Pacific. After the American loss, British explorers like Captain James Cook charted the Pacific, claiming New Zealand and Australia's east coast. In 1788, Britain began using Australia as a penal colony, shipping convicts once bound for America. Over decades, free settlers followed, and Australia became a key outpost. In India, the East India Company expanded relentlessly. By the early 1800s, it ruled vast territories either directly or through allied princes backed by its private army. British merchants also pushed into China, triggering the Opium Wars and the cession of Hong Kong, 1842. The Napoleonic Wars and a century of empire. From 1803 to 1815, Britain faced Napoleon Bonaparte's France, fighting to defend both home and empire. The Royal Navy's victory at Trafalgar, 1805, ensured Britain's security and naval dominance for over a century. After Napoleon's defeat, Britain gained new colonies such as Malta, Mauritius, Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, Ceylon, the Cape Colony, and island outposts, vital for global trade. The Industrial Revolution supercharged Britain's empire. Factories needed raw materials and markets. Steamships and railways shrank distances. Britain turned its navy and global finance into tools of control. At home, public pressure also grew to end the slave trade. Britain abolished the trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1834, though the empire had long profited from enslaved labor. India becomes the jewel in the crown. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, or Sepoy Mutiny, marked a turning point. Sparked by resentment of East India Company rule, the uprising was crushed, but it convinced Britain the company could no longer govern effectively. In 1858, the British government took direct control of India, making it the empire's most prized possession, the jewel in the crown. India's wealth and manpower underpinned British power, from cotton for factories to soldiers for imperial wars. Yet British rule also bred resentment that would later fuel independence movements. The Great Game and Africa's partition. During the 19th century, Britain competed fiercely with Russia in Central Asia, fearing Russian moves toward India and the Mediterranean. This rivalry, the Great Game, produced espionage, diplomacy, and occasional war, including Britain's intervention in the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, to halt Russian expansion. Meanwhile, Britain consolidated its hold on Africa. It expanded from the Cape Colony, fought and eventually annexed the Boer republics of the Transvaal and Orange Free State after the Anglo-Boer Wars, and claimed vast regions during the scramble for Africa. Control of Egypt in the Suez Canal, occupied in 1882, secured the route to India. Britain dreamed of a Cape to Cairo railway, linking its African territories, though the project was never fully completed. The Dominions seek autonomy. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Britain's white settler colonies matured. Canada became a self-governing confederation in 1867. Australia and New Zealand followed in 1901 and 1907 as dominions with internal independence, but British control over foreign affairs. These nations were proud parts of the empire, but increasingly self-directed. Ireland, however, remained contentious. Repeated efforts to grant home rule failed, sowing seeds of future conflict. World War I, empire at war. When World War I erupted in 1914, Britain drew deeply on its empire. Soldiers from Canada, India, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and the Caribbean fought and died on distant battlefields. Britain and its allies defeated Germany and the Ottoman Empire, gaining new territories in the Middle East and Africa under League of Nations mandates. Yet victory came at enormous cost. Britain emerged financially strained, and nationalist movements within the empire gained strength. In 1921, Ireland won independence, splitting into the Irish Free State and Northern Ireland. This moment signaled the empire's fragility. World War II and the winds of change. The Second World War dealt a heavier blow. Though Britain and its empire fought valiantly, with Indian, African, and Commonwealth troops crucial to victory, the war bankrupted Britain and elevated new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. After 1945, Britain could no longer sustain its vast empire. Independence movements surged, often inspired by wartime sacrifices and ideals of self-determination. Over the next decades, Britain granted freedom to India and Pakistan, 1947, most of Africa, the 1950s to the 1970s, the Caribbean and Pacific territories. This wave of decolonization became known as the wind of change. The Commonwealth and the empire's legacy. Even as colonies gained independence, most retained ties through the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association promoting cooperation. Some, like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, kept the British monarch as head of state. The symbolic end of empire came in 1997 when Britain handed Hong Kong back to China. Yet the empire's legacy endures. The English language dominates global communication. British legal systems, culture, and sports have worldwide influence. And Britain itself became a diverse, multicultural nation shaped by migration from former colonies. Why Britain's empire rose and fell. Britain's imperial success rested on a unique mix of maritime supremacy. The Royal Navy protected trade and conquered rivals. Industrial power. Britain's factories and finances funded global reach. Flexible colonial models. From charter companies to dominions, Britain adapted governance to local conditions. Global trade networks. Mercantilism and free trade created wealth and influence. But the empire fell because of shifting economics, rising nationalism, and global wars that drained Britain's strength. The rise of America and the USSR made Britain's global dominance impossible to maintain. If you enjoyed this video into the rise and fall of the world's largest empire and want to discover more stories that shaped our modern world, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you next time.